Hey, good afternoon everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Well, we've got hot and dry conditions, and it's been this way for several days, and it's supposed to go on like this for a while. So as far as solar charging goes, everything is full, looking good, an abundance of solar power. And we've got a new battery to look at today. So let's get right to it. Beautiful day, a little warm. So here we have the 12 volt 200 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery from ENJOYBOT. ENJOYBOT reached out to me a little while ago, sent this battery out for a review. It's going to be a different kind of a review than I normally do, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. We're actually going to tear this battery down. This battery looks very similar to many other batteries we have reviewed of this size. Of course, on your terminals, you've got some thread protectors. Came with some M8 terminal bolts and a couple of caps to cover it up with after you get your installation done. And on this one, it has about as much information on the battery as it does in the manual. So this has a 200 amp BMS, has a max discharge capability of 200 amps, and a max charging capacity of 100 amps. So nice that it's got that 200 amp BMS on board. That gives you a little bit more flexibility with what you're going to run off of it. And for example, the inverter size would be up to about 2,560 watts is what this thing could handle. So a standard 2,000 watt inverter tied up to this will be absolutely perfect, and you won't be over discharging it or overworking it. That would be well within its parameters. And like most of the other batteries we review, it's got nice handles on both sides for picking it up and moving it around nice and easy. So looks very standard. This battery claims a cycle life of 2,000 cycles at 100% depth of discharge and up to 5,000 cycles at an 80% depth of discharge. And again, like I said, most of the information that is provided in this very small basic manual is pretty much covered on the stickers that the battery has on it. There's not a lot extra in the manual itself. There are a few other pictures and diagrams of various installations like they all seem to have, but most of the basic information is right here. And I would recommend that you read this manual. It's a small manual, not much information in there, but covers all the pertinent points that you need to know about hooking this thing up. And this battery has been sitting at rest for a couple of weeks since its arrival. I have not put any charge on it whatsoever, and there's the voltage that it arrived with, 13.22 volts. And that's pretty much normal with how these batteries are shipped out. They're not shipped out fully charged, as I've mentioned many times before, and this one wasn't either. So the first thing we're going to do is charge this up full, and we're going to make sure that it does that perfectly. And then we're going to tear this thing apart. And a lot of you know that I'm not much of a tear down guy. It kind of goes against a lot of my principles about tearing down a perfectly good looking battery. And well, there's the fan on one of my inverters going, so I'll pause this just for a second. Okay, it's a little warm in the shop today, about 90 degrees Fahrenheit right now. And what I was starting to say was there is just not much wiggle room to get anything under here to pop this case open. I'll probably take a putty knife, but I'm just trying to show you that this thing is pretty well sealed, and it does have an IP65 rating, which is why it's sealed so good here. But I'm going to try and get this all taken apart and disassembled without doing too much damage to it. But like I said, before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and fully charge this. And we're going to move this outside to do a lot of the testing. So before I do that, I'll tell you this weighs in right at 49 pounds. It does have high temperature and low temperature disconnect built into it. And that's what a couple of the things that we will be testing to make sure it lives up to those specifications. And we'll take a good look at the cells inside as well. So I'm going to take it outside right now, start running some panels into it and a charge controller and see how it charges up. Okay, move this battery outside, created a little small temporary charging station to put its first full charge on it before we tear this thing down. And we've got it hooked up to the Victron MPPT 7515. I did put a solar isolator switch on it just so I could charge the charge controller first off the batteries as you're supposed to, and then lastly open up the solar panels. You want to do it in that order. You shouldn't open up your panels until you've got that turned on. So that's what we did. And we're charging with 300 watts of solar. Those first two are Bouge RV 100 watt monocrystalline solar panels. That last one's a New Power 12 volt 100 watt. All three are 100 watt. Close enough in voltage to tie them in series. And we've run a 30-foot extension cable up to the charge controller and isolator switch. And then a quick look at the Victron app, which shows us what's happening with that charge controller and battery. You can see up there I renamed the charge controller to ENJOYBOT, so I know what battery I'm looking at since I run a lot of different Victron charge controllers, and currently there's some clouds rolling through. 120 watts coming in, 48, 50-ish voltage, 50 volts coming through there on that 75 volt charge controller, and it's pushing 2.6 amps of current and 9.5 amps going into that battery. So we're going to let that get fully charged. It only took a minute to hook up this little station here. It's only going to be up for charging this battery, then I'm going to disconnect it and tie into another system. But all my other systems were busy right now, so we're just putting the initial charge on this, and then we're going to tear it apart and discharge it and run it through some other tests. Okay guys, here we are 2 days later, and this is a completely full battery, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, we've got 1 watt holding this in float right now, and the voltage is starting to come down from 14.2. It made it to float yesterday, and I'll show you what that looked like. So it took 2 full days. We took 850 watt hours on the first day off that 300 watt string of solar panels we were charging this battery up with. And then yesterday it took 740 watt hours before it went into full absorption and float. And then this being the 3rd day since I left you when we started charging this battery up, you can see that it started with a minimum voltage of 13.46 is what it dropped down to, with nothing coming in all night long. And it only took about 2 or 3 watts to kick it right back into absorption this morning, and now back in float. So we're going to disconnect this battery now and tear it down and run it through its tests. But that's what it looked like. Took 2 days. Pretty good charging conditions. They weren't the absolute best, but just 2 leisure days of charging that battery up. All of these previous days here were a different battery. So this is where we started on this one, 850 watt hours the first day, 740 the second, and just sitting there at float now. And the cats just ate, and they're completely full, so they're in float too. Yeah, so that did go much better than I thought. I suffered no damage, which was my goal. I really don't want to damage this. This is the worst damage that I took right there. And that was just on the initial start. And then it started separating as I went with that screwdriver. I did that all the way around. And there we go. Okay, so now I'm just going to disconnect those leads, of course. And I'm going to tape up those ends because it is a fully charged battery. And I don't want to make any inadvertent contact. And then I'm going to pull this out. It looks like it's just sealed a little bit with some silicone and some rubber blocks for packing and being tight in there. Both sides, just looks like 4 rubber blocks on the side. These on the top that were protecting the top won't be an issue. So yeah, we're going to do that now. Okay, I've got those leads disconnected and I've got them taped up good. So when I pull this out, there's no chance of those making contact and creating any kind of a short. Since it is a fully charged battery, you want to take that extra precaution. So now I'm going to pop that thing out of the case. So popping that case lid off was the easiest of this operation. I ended up having to do a real tear down, and like I've seen others do, I had to break a saw out and I had to cut the side off of this case in order to pop it off the bottom. I could not, for the life of me, pull that out of the case, and I had to take the skill saw and I'll pull this over so you can see. Just and I saved you all the expletives because they were flying, but I mean, they had so much silicone down on the bottom of that attached to there that I simply didn't have the strength to pull that out. I could get a purchase with my hands under here after, and I mean, I've been fiddling with this for a couple of hours trying not to destroy the case. But yeah, I had to cut the side out of it. Now I'll be able to patch that up. No real harm done, but mercy, that was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And now I know why all the other guys use a saw and make short work of that and save yourself 2 hours of frustration, because that was crazy stuck on there. But now I wish I would have done that within 1 minute of popping the top off, because the top went off without so much as a blemish on it, hardly. But anyway, it's up. And yeah, now we'll take a look at it. Oh, that was exhausting. So now we have the shrink wrap cut off, and after that we sliced open this epoxy board. Both of those were easy, and now we can get our first real good look at these cells and the build here. And I'll just go over this a little bit with you and see. You can see that the bus bars, you know, they're not completely flat. You can see some bends in them. And I'll show you at this angle what they look like. I don't know how much of that is typical or not, since this is my first tear down. But they're not completely flat, but they look like they're welded on to the batteries very securely. And then all the battery cells are taped together. And here's what it looks like looking down on the construction here. I believe that black lead there is the low temperature disconnect switch. We will find that out here shortly. And I believe under this plate here, this white wire going in there is the high temperature disconnect. So we're going to pop that plate off and take a look at that and see. So a couple of things that ENJOYBOT really wanted me to highlight about this battery was the cells, which they claim are grade A prismatic cells, and their low temperature disconnect. So here's the thing I find out about the cells. If you look closely, the identifying marks or QR code, whatever was there, has been ground down on every single cell. So I have no identifying numbers on there and how to research this the cells of this battery and find out exactly what they are. You can see very clearly, like a Dremel tool has been in here and ground off the identifying numbers of every single cell. I have nothing to research on this, which I was hoping to find the numbers, the QR code, do a little research on that and report back to you what they are. Now that's got to be unusual. I've watched several other videos, lots of teardowns, even on these batteries, and I've not seen this before. So I'm left with the question, why would they grind the identifying marks off of these cells? Every single cell. There's not a clear code or a clear set of numbers where I can actually do a little research on these cells. The other thing that I do notice about these cells is they are not completely flat against each other. Some are, but I mean, you can see this first one, there's some gap in there. That one looks pretty tight together, those two cells. Move on to the next one. Got some gap. Got some gap there. Got some gap there. That one's a little tighter. And over here have really quite a lot of gap, which, you know, they should be laying completely flat against each other. And I want to come over here and show you. Now, to my naked eye, when I was looking down on this one, to the naked eye, it looked like there was a slight bulge in the center of this particular cell. And if I put a straight edge, not on that tape, but in between the tape there, this straight edge, it's laying flat in the center. But as you can see right there, there's a gap on that end, and there's a gap on that end. And that is with a perfectly straight edge. So I don't know about that either. And here's another shot with another perfect straight edge. Nice and flat in the center, but on those ends, there's a definite gap. So there is some slight bulging in that cell, and I assume by the gaps that I'm seeing throughout this build that I would find much the same discrepancy like I see here on these other cells, but that would require me dismantling all of these bus bars and taking everything apart, which I am not going to do. But the most concerning thing for me is, why would they grind off all the identifying numbers? So I'm really curious if any of you guys have any idea about why they would do that. You can just clearly see they have been all ground down. That really threw me for a loop. I was really hoping to be able to look these up and tell you exactly what they were, and I can't. So here I have removed the 4 screws holding this plate over the BMS, which is got the thermal switch in there. So that popped right off, easy enough. And right there, as you can see right there, That's the thermal switch. I can see that it says 85 degrees Celsius on that. And I'll try and give you a close-up, but it's upside down. So we're gonna see if that works. And then we'll go to what I believe is the low temperature disconnect switch, which is siliconed on top of one of the cells. But this is just adhered to the BMS with a little of, that's like a putty type tape that it's stuck on there with, 85 degrees Celsius. So we'll kind of pull that away, put a heat gun on it while we're running the load and see what it does. Okay, I've got this battery all hooked up, and I should say that this battery has been at rest now since it was fully charged up for over a week. It's taken a while to get this experiment completely done. And I just tested the voltage at the terminals. It's at 13.6, so it is a fully charged battery. We have it hooked up to this 1500 watt pure sine wave inverter, which we'll turn on. And it's reading it at 13.7, so pretty close. 13.6 at the terminals, inverter reading at 13.7. Gonna peel off that thermal switch and put this heat gun on it, and it should turn everything off. Okay, the inverter is on, heat gun in hand. Heat gun is running on a low setting. And we'll just let this run till it kicks off. Hopefully it kicks off. Pulling the battery down to 12.8 while it's running. It should kick off here any second. Now I should say that I did test this off camera a minute ago. I missed the shot. It did kick off. Took it a little bit longer. I didn't want to kick this onto high so I wouldn't melt that thermal switch. And this is about the distance I was holding it. And it did go off. And now I'm trying to catch it on film. And still going. Still going. Okay. Yeah, I had to recharge the BMS to get it to turn back on after it did its initial disconnect. That thing should be kicking off now. Taking a little bit longer. Took a little bit longer than I thought it should have the first time too. I'm just taking care not to melt that thermal switch. Yeah, still taking a little bit longer than I would think. Perseverance. It did it once. And I did have to restart the BMS with a little charge on it, and it came right back. And there, it kicked off. The inverter is off. Thermal switch works. I probably could have got that to kick off quicker on a higher temperature, but like I said, I really didn't want to melt that thing. I've never done this before. Trying to take good care of this battery still, even though we've torn it apart. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll have to let this cool off a minute, and then I'm going to recharge the BMS again, put a little bit of a charge onto the battery at those terminals right there that you can see. And then we will come here. I got the low temperature switch peeled off enough, and I've got some ice water ready. So we'll see if it lives up to that. So I'm gonna recharge it real quick and get back with the ice water test. Okay, we've got 300 watts of solar tied up to this. It's only putting in 86 watts at the moment. Let's submerge this low temperature disconnect. Give it a few seconds. Few more seconds. It should cut off the charging since we're simulating this being cold by dumping that probe in that ice water. Well, I've been sitting here for several minutes without running the camera. Nothing has changed. It's still charging. 70 watts or so coming in off those panels. Low temperature charging disconnect. Probe still in icy cold water. Still charging. So just to kind of wrap this up, what I found, you know, the cells, I don't know what to say about those since I cannot identify them. The high temperature disconnect did work, but as you can see on the side there, it says do not expose to temperature above 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's got that 85 degree Celsius switch on it, which that is 185 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know if that's the temperature I had to reach with that heat gun before it kicked off, which seems a little hot. And then I was never able to get that low temperature to disconnect. And off camera, I tried so many things that I did not include in this. And I used the infrared gun, everything to know that my temperature, I was taking temperatures down in ice cream as low as like 7 degrees Fahrenheit. So I could never get that thing to switch off no matter how many tests I ran on it. This has been a very, very long video. Thanks for sticking around. Be interested to see what you guys have to say. The only thing left to do now is slip this into some production, see how it holds up. But yeah, the high temperature did work, high temperature disconnect. I could get that to work. It took a while, as you saw. Never did get that low temperature in many, many tries. Could never get that thing to work right. Still charges under the simulation of being down to very cold temperatures. So yeah, mixed bag. So thanks as always for tuning in, you guys. I know this is a very long video. It just turned out to be that way. It's been going off and on with lots of pieces over the past couple of weeks. I'll put it all together and be interested to hear what you guys have to say about it. Beautiful day here today. Aloha. Yeah, I just don't know what to say about that in the end.